And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Traveling up. Roger, Atlantic.
Water towers fly! Yes!
Tango down to nominal.
Fighting downside FD off. Bring in FD off. It's orange! Orange 25!
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
What do you think?
Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
If there's methane would be igniting with the flare, correct?
Yikes. Keep red. We don't need any more of these.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lon Seidman here with NSF, and we are doing our new regular live show called Countdown to Launch. And this show will be regular so long as we are watching things over at Starbase in Texas to see when we might have a launch take place. That launch definitely will not be taking place today, but there's a lot to talk about and a lot going on. Our cameras are trained on that Starbase in Texas 24/7. So if something happens in the middle of the stream, as it's been happening on the last couple that we've done, we will certainly cut to that and clue you in as to what's going on there. But I have some experts joining me today to kind of process the news that we've gotten over the weekend. First is Ian Atkinson. How you doing, Ian?
Doing great, Lon. Glad to be here. Excited to see the progress in Starship continuing and talk about a lot of it today. I'm excited for a nice little 1-hour discussion that we got going on.
That's right. Our plan is to do an hour today and try to pack in as much information as we can. And sometimes we go longer when stuff's happening over there. I think somebody at SpaceX is like watching us to see what they can do to extend the length of our show. But we also have Sawyer joining us. Sawyer Rosenstein, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Maybe a Monday, but Mondays aren't always a bad thing, especially when we get to talk about Starship.
And I have a feeling that there's no such thing as a weekend over at Starbase, gentlemen. What do you think?
Yeah, weekend is kind of a loose term. Weekend is maybe more like week extension. It's just a day just to keep doing more work. I mean, we know that, of course, they're a little bit limited on what they can do for testing on weekends, but that does not mean a thing when it comes to vehicle work and launch preparations over the weekend. So they've been absolutely going at it, getting the pad clear, getting everything ready, doing final checkouts on the vehicle here and there, as well as continuing to build future ships and boosters. I mean, we even saw future boosters being rolled out for testing. We're seeing assembly continuing. There's parts scattered all throughout the site, and there's so many ships and vehicles being worked on. It is unbelievably busy down there at Starbase, as it always is. This is no exception.
It's crazy how much activity is going on there. And one of the big things that we've been keeping an eye on is the status of when the FAA is going to license the flight of the booster that they fully have stacked there. And I'll turn it over to Sawyer because there's some dispute as to how many items are on the list that have to get sorted out. And there was a tweet from Elon over the weekend that had some more information. Why don't you fill us in on what we're looking at there?
Yeah, so as you can also probably tell a little bit by the title of the stream, there were 63 total improvements that were suggested, and 57 of them are complete, so there are 6 to go. But it doesn't necessarily seem like all 6 of those are things that they're going to, A, be able to complete ahead of a second flight, and B, need to complete ahead of the second flight. And as we've talked about here, and as we've mentioned, I think it's important to emphasize that those 63 items were suggested by SpaceX themselves. This was a SpaceX incident report that the FAA then went ahead and approved and said, okay, you've got the right idea there, SpaceX. So there are still some items to go, but basically the main takeaway from that is that the FAA said, all right, we get what you're saying. We get where you're at, and we're kind of on board with that. So the next big thing will be to see when SpaceX applies for the new launch license to go ahead and try for the second integrated flight test.
And Ian, in looking through some of this report, there's a lot of kind of cagey language. We're not seeing the redactions that you see in a Department of Defense document where everything is crossed out, But there's terminology like a certain whatever, like a certain sensor or a certain valve or whatever. Can you kind of show us some of those examples?
Yeah,
And
so
what
I mean,
those are, what those might
so
be?
looking through these lists, there are so many different examples of like kind of general language. Like they're not going to go out and tell you replace seal on Raptor number 14 to prevent this from happening. You're not going to get any of that. There's a lot of proprietary ITAR information. But there's some good amount of information we can get here. I mean, right there at the second line from top, talking about increasing fire suppression capacity by 15 times. That is a very, very big change. That's a very kind of definite change. We've seen them doing some adding some additional tanks onto the side of the vehicle, the side of the booster, inside of those strakes, the chines. My bad. Adding some tanks inside of there for fire suppression inside the aft of the vehicle. So we know that's been a pretty big change there. You can see the third line down right below that saying replace certain manifolds with dedicated drain for corresponding valve. That could mean anything throughout the booster. That could be 70 meters up, or that could be right at the bottom. So we're not getting any specific examples here, but this document still, I need to say that this is an excellent look inside of the mitigations and the fixes that they've been doing. And kind of SpaceX's design philosophy here of rapidly iterating, rapidly fixing, and just putting out tons of fixes. I mean, these are 57 definite notable fixes between the last flight and this flight within what has been like 6 months between flights. That's a lot of changes here and a lot of improvements. So it's really great to see kind of the cut and dry of all of it, the actual improvements that we're doing.
And for viewers that may not know, what is ITAR? And why can't you, what's the restriction that prevents you from releasing some of this stuff?
ITAR is basically a government, it's called the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. And basically what it means, it limits what you can and cannot publish in regards to military secrets. The thing that we're focusing on right here in rocketry is the rocketry aspect of it. Because when you look at it, missiles, especially ICBMs, are rockets. So you don't want you don't want enemies to learn exactly how a Raptor works. You don't want Raptor.stl.
Although if I could jump in here a second, it's
Absolutely.
It's something that's used quite often. Sometimes it seems like it's a little too much of, oh, they're really just trying to keep industry secrets. But yeah, the main goal is, as you mentioned, not allowing enemies to get sensitive information. In some case, not allowing competitors to get some of that sensitive information. A lot of times, especially, it comes to things like engines. So we've seen it with Merlins, with Raptors, of trying to basically say, we don't want you getting a fully deep, close inside look at all of the inner workings and all of the, wiring and all of that. So that's the main thing with ITAR. But yes, it is technically International Trade in Arms Regulation.
And I think it's something where like a rocket the size of Starship could be a pretty darn big missile, and I could see why they may want to restrict some of that stuff. So we have corporate secrets, we've got ITAR regulation here as well, and what you can actually release to the public is far more limited. Let me turn this question over to Sawyer here real quick from Andy Skiba in our chat. Are there any action items that were surprising here, or is this about what we've been speculating on here with the NSF team? I know everyone's been very focused on a lot of these items that we saw show up on this report.
I mean, in all honesty, I think a lot of the items are things that make sense. Needing to, upgrade certain things with the flight termination system, needing to upgrade wiring, the engine section, obviously, thermal protection of avionics tray, like you see right there. As you see, collateral damage from fire. A lot of that coming down to what we saw down with the engines and them kind of leaking and catching fire and severing important flight control lines. So those are mostly important. There's some that are, obviously a little bizarre, and some that are definitely on the vague side, like one that just says replace sensor with more reliable units.
Right.
Things like that. So I don't think there's anything that's really a surprise. I think what's most surprising is the wording, how vague some of them can be.
Absolutely. And we have to speculate now also. So the rest of the show is likely going to be about speculation because we don't know more than what little we saw in that report and also what has been discussed from the FAA side. And to that end, we have some reporting by our own DOS, who got some statements from the FAA about the timeline and what is coming next, because we've got a report now. We don't have a license, and DAS, I think, really broke this down quite well, including getting some comment from the FAA. So whenever we're ready in the control room here, let's roll that clip and learn more.
All be all of flying again. Now, before making this video, I actually reached out to the FAA and asked a couple questions which I thought might help us understand what to expect. I mean, can the FAA provide any insight into the historical expected turnaround time between application and approval of a license? Does applying for a modification, as per the FAA letter of September 7th, instead of a new license, change that expected time frame? I mean, is it easier to modify than do it from the ground up on a new license, right? And can the FAA release when the modification or application for a second Starship flight license is actually submitted by SpaceX? And to their credit, I got a response from the FAA less than 4 hours after I sent that email. And this on a day where I guarantee you that everybody was on the FAA's comms team like rats on a Cheeto. And the FAA responded to me. The time frame to evaluate a license modification application from submission to final determination will vary. It is based on the operator submitting a complete application, its responsiveness to FAA questions and requests for additional information, the complexity of the proposed modification, and how much of the FAA's original review needs to be reevaluated. And honestly, that's fair. I mean, you can't look at the turnaround times for, say, Falcon 9, which is a reliable, proven rocket with tons of success under its landing legs, and try to use that to figure out how Starship license turnaround times might be. I mean, remember, Starship is the largest, most powerful rocket that puny human beings have ever made, so it's going to take a little bit of time to work through. But remember, the onus is on SpaceX to provide that information and be responsive to any questions that are asked. They're the ones who know. And here at the very end, you may have noticed this theme throughout the video. Please contact SpaceX for information specific to its licensing requests.
I love this, like everybody pointing the finger at everyone else as to when are we moving forward here. And the answer is we're no closer to knowing the launch date, but we are now starting to see some pieces fall into place. M2M here in our chat noted that they closed the mishap investigation, but there's still, of course, more to do here. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is the amount of pressure we might see now applied to the FAA from Elon Musk, because we have this issue of the FAA saying there are 63 items, Elon Musk saying 57, and the balance are things that we're going to do later. I suspect that what's happening right now is that the difference in the number of items that each party believes need to be rectified might be a negotiating point. And one of the advantages that SpaceX has is that SpaceX can release a list of things like they did over the weekend. The FAA really cannot, because they're bound by confidentiality for SpaceX's corporate secrets. They're also bound by the ITAR restrictions, and they have a due process that they have to go through, where if they're communicating to the public about a case before them, it could certainly harm their position and potentially result in legal action. So they really can't say much more than they said to DAS. And actually, I'm surprised they said that much to DAS. But I think what we might see in the coming weeks is probably, or the days, might be Elon posting more to try to push the public to get the FAA moving here. And it may not just be the public, it may also be members of Congress. It may also be friendly people in the administration who might want to nudge the FAA further here, because we're not talking about a law, we're talking about an interpretation of flight readiness and safety, and that is something that is open to interpretation. So I think we're going to see a lot more out of Elon over the next week trying to get the FAA moving, because I'm sure he wants to get that rocket off the pad. What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, SpaceX has, an incentive to want to launch as soon as possible. Starship is their holy grail of rocketry. It is their big project they're working on right now. And like I mentioned before, SpaceX's design philosophy is build, fly, fail, fix, repeat. It is not test, 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 test. 8 years go by, now we can go. So they really do have an incentive to fly again, because that's how they're getting their data here. That's how they can get to Flight 3 faster than Flight 4, then fly operational payloads. So it makes sense that Elon is trying to kind of, nudge the FAA and be like, hey, we're ready on this. Are you ready on this? So yeah, they definitely do have an incentive there to kind of try to push the FAA where they can to get this going.
And Sawyer, the flight plan for this rocket launch is to take the Starship around the Earth at least once. Is that correct? So there's a lot of safety issues that we have to think about here once it gets into orbit, if it does.
Not exactly. It's actually technically going on a suborbital trajectory.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, the ship is expected to, I guess we'll say splash down, although likely hard impact into the water off of the coast of Hawaii. So close to making it all the way around, but not actually going into orbit. But regardless, as you mentioned, there's still always safety concerns. That's why you tend to see launches, at least in the US, maybe not in China, but in the US, go over water and try to avoid land as much as possible, even with some crazy dog legs. You still have the risk, though. I mean, immediately at liftoff, and depending on the way the wind blows, things like that, sure, there's a risk. We saw even after this first flight test, there was pieces of concrete that flew quite far. There were pieces that were washing up on shore from the ship itself. So yeah, obviously one of their main concerns is safety of people. That's why they're emphasizing making sure the flight termination system works this time. And that's why the trajectory tries to basically avoid as much land as possible.
And River Dave Kenny here in the chat has a question about that flight termination system. I think we've all been watching activity at Starbase like a hawk to see if those that flight termination system has been installed and or armed. Ian, are we seeing anything yet on that? Because that'll be a good indicator that perhaps the license is moving closer to approval.
Yeah, so we have actually seen some improvements to the flight termination system, including some actual testing. They actually blew up a test tank. I believe it was called Booster 6 or B6.1. They blew it up using flight termination system. This is a few months ago. So we know they've done some kind of hands-on physical testing of this new hardware. It's even mentioned in the FAA document there as part of the changes. In terms of the FTS arming, that is one of the absolute last things they do before launch. So we will see the explosives, the ordnance be installed. I believe it actually may be installed. And it'll stay installed for a little bit throughout the last bits of testing. But the absolute last thing that happens before launch, you have crews out there on a crew lift. They basically pull pins out and arm the flight termination system. So the FTS should not be armed, and it will not be armed for a little while until right before launch.
And if I can add a few things in there to go with that, they've beefed up the flight termination system. Besides just testing it, they literally added another box that you can see on the booster and the ship that has more explosives that hopefully will actually work in what's needed to break the ship apart, since it didn't kind of go as planned during the first flight. So that'll be part of it. And there's multiple steps to arming it, like you talked about there. There's the D-stack when they then pull the pins, and then there's also a computerized arming of it during the actual count itself. And a reminder, that flight termination system, like arming, basically where they pull the pin, is just one of a couple of ways to know that we are getting that much closer to launch. What are the other ways? Well, there may be a video in the works. Keep an eye on the channel to find out.
Ooh, that's a good tease. So make sure you hit that bell, right? Ring the bell and get some information on, or find out when it gets posted there. Here's a question from Flamin' Hot Cheetos, the spicy ones. One item on the list requires 90-plus cameras for leak monitoring, because that was one of the big issues of engines shutting down because fuel was leaking all over the place, and hydraulic fluid perhaps as well. Does this mean we're going to see more camera views for the launch live stream? I don't think SpaceX gives us that, Ian, but maybe we'll see some more on their recorded videos. Those might be some really cool engineering views.
There might be, but I would say it's incredibly unlikely. A lot of those were discussing cameras to look at the engines. And as Sawyer said a few minutes ago, engines are very hush-hush when it comes to ITAR. Along, not even just ITAR, but also proprietary information. SpaceX doesn't want you to know exactly how Raptor works, all the little secrets in there. So while there may be 90 extra cameras inside the vehicle, sure, maybe we could see one or two of those extra, but I really would not count on it. These are engineering cameras. There are dozens of cameras throughout rockets, and we only see maybe 3 to 5 during a launch webcast, so it's pretty unlikely we'll see any of these in any way, shape, or form, especially the engine cams, unless we get super lucky.
It looks like they'll have a lot more to look at, though, at least internally there. Imagine Beyond asked this question. When Starship launches with 33 engines, talking about multiple engines, Exhaust expansion will occur. Will this cause any problems when the exhaust from the two different Raptor engines, or the different Raptor 2 engines, mixes? I don't know, sorry, if you can take that one, and maybe Ian too.
I don't think there's going to be that much of an issue with the expansion. I mean, A, part of that is built into the design. They know it's going to happen. And B, the other thing is now they've added that extra shielding around each of the engines, especially on the bottom of that first stage there, to make sure that if there's an overpressurization or a leak or something that causes a rud of one of the engines, well, then you've got plenty more where that came from. You've got the shield so that you still have plenty more where that came from. That, all right, you're just down one engine instead of a cascading domino effect of, well, maybe that throws shrapnel into another engine and that causes another leak and so on. And by the way, while we're talking about the engineering cameras, you can actually see to my left, whichever way it is, just some of those engineering cameras. Like, for example, mark your bingo cards. For certain shuttle launches, there were as much as 117 different cameras, and maybe you'd see 7 of them during the launch. The rest were engineering cameras. So it's just, there's a lot more that we don't get to see, but is very much used, especially when it comes to these 63 items of going, what went wrong and what do we need to fix?
Also, real quick, Sawyer, I want to hop in and say that boxy camera, the second from left, I believe that's an IMAX camera. Unless they've changed it out, there was an IMAX camera in that spot for the first launch. I don't know if we saw any actual IMAX footage from it, or if it even was recording or anything, but there was an IMAX camera there, and I believe it is still installed, the second from left on the top of that tower. But yeah, like you said, a lot of engineering cameras in play here, on the ground and on the vehicle.
And that IMAX camera, I bet, is also going to give you that hero shot of it going up, right, Sawyer?
Yes.
Yeah, we may or may not also have a video in the works explaining how these engineering cameras worked, especially for shuttle, which, by the way, we have a bunch of those views available as part of the L2 forum on the NASA Spaceflight forums.
And I've seen some of those videos. They are super cool, so definitely check those out. And we have a lot of cameras on site as well. In fact, the camera view we're looking at, to whatever direction we are here, are coming from the cameras that NSF has installed all around Starbase. So whenever we're showing you live footage of what's going on there, we're not getting this from SpaceX. This is coming from our own cameras, staffed by our own crew who keep an eye on things 24/7. Because when we see activity going on down there, we go live to share it with you. And of course, if anything happens over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, we will definitely cut in and show you that. And the way we bring this to you is through your support. And we've got a bunch of people to thank here in the chat, which I'm going to run through quickly. We have Gerard Blaunsteiner, I hope I got that name correct, who just became a PadRat member. We also have Jim Cavett, who became a PadRat member, and gifted a Red Team membership. RC Horseman gifted a Red Team membership, along with Jeff Rowe and Martin Klavzar. And we also have a new member, M2M, who asked a question a little bit earlier. And if you hang out in our chat long enough, more than likely somebody might gift you a membership, but you can also click that button there and become a member here. Sawyer, what do you get if you become a member of the NSF YouTube channel?
I mean, you get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes photos and videos. For example, you've got some of Jack's flyover pictures and stuff before they're released anywhere to the public that you can get as a member. Same with some of the launch shots that I got yesterday from the Atlas rocket, things like that. And then anyone that's Capcom member and above also then gets access to our NSF Discord, where you can talk about all the different spaceflight programs. There's an entire channel dedicated just to Starship. There's ones where people play KSP, and even a food channel in honor of Jack. So.
Awesome. And this, we probably have no idea what these guys are doing here, but I see some guy with a shovel digging down at the pad there. What do you think he's doing right now? What are they putting in? Could this be some of the because they were replacing some of the piping for the water system they have there, weren't they?
Yeah, this is interesting. We actually did see some construction equipment drive off to the right of camera there. Probably just doing some like last-minute earth moving, making sure everything's in place. It looks like they're shoveling stuff from inside a concrete thing out of there, so maybe some dirt that accumulated there from mud during rain and things like that. But definitely doing some last-minute earthwork here to make sure it doesn't get ejected away from the pad during launch.
Right. And the other thing we're keeping an eye on down there, again, trying to figure out when this launch date might be. are some of the things that we see around the FAA license. In other words, things that are related to it but not inclusive of it. Some of those things, Sawyer, include road closures and mariner notices. Have we seen anything yet that might indicate that that might be happening?
No, we haven't. In fact, the exact opposite. We had seen that they had originally planned, as they're called, not Mars, notice to mariners, and Das does a good job talking about that in the new video as well. They were up originally for around September 8th, but yeah, they kind of got rid of those and said, never mind, and they're not there at the moment. So once those go up, again, another indicator that we're getting that much closer. But until that point, we haven't seen any new Not Mars with a new date. I haven't seen anything from the air closures as well. NOTAMs, now called Notice to Air Missions. And yeah, we haven't seen anything even from SpaceX from a media perspective of, hey, get ready, here we go.
Right, so those are the... Go ahead, Ian.
Go ahead, Lon.
I was going to say, those are the tea leaves that we look for, and none of them are indicating anything. But go ahead, Ian.
I was going to say, back on the camera view we were looking at 2 camera views ago, something caught my attention that I feel is a bit of an indicator as to when we're going to see a launch. So Ship 26 was very recently rolled out onto suborbital pad B, I believe it is. Oh, yes, it is on B there. You can see it's actually just been recently put on there by the crane to do likely some initial engine testing. I believe it's gone through cryogenic proofing already. But the fact that they've brought that out there tells me the launch is a few weeks away at the earliest. And that's because they probably wouldn't want to launch a rocket that has a decent chance of shooting off large pieces of debris even a mile away with a brand new ship sitting nearby. Of course, Ship 26 is of an older design, but the fact that they're bringing it out to the pad tells me they're lining it up either as the third flight or maybe as a backup vehicle for the third flight. So I think it's going to be a bit of a minute until we see a launch because Ship 26 is out there. You don't want to damage it. So I think that it tells us that we are a minute away from launch, given that Ship 26 is now recently moved out to the pad.
And that brings to mind a question I got here from Alex Foster in our chat, who says, after all of the damage to the tank farm from the last launch, do you think they'll fix it or leave it as is? Because that's an example of what all that concrete did. It dented a lot of those tanks, but they're still functional, obviously. Clearly, though, there was some denting going on. So what do you think about this? Do you think they'll put the Ship 26 back in the hangar before they launch?
Unless they are somehow extremely confident that it's not going to get damaged, or somehow do not care about Ship 26 after testing it, which seems incredibly unlikely. I think we will see Ship 26 go back to the production site a few days before launch. And that might be a good medium-term indicator ahead of launch. Not necessarily, hey, launch is X amount of days away, but like, okay, we're coming up. They're starting to clean up shop here and get things organized. But yeah, I think it's a bit of an indicator that it's going to be a little bit.
So no TAMs, no Mars, road closures, movement of Ship 26, and then an FAA license. We've got 5 checklist items that we haven't seen yet. So it looks like it might be a little bit longer there. Sorry, do you agree?
And
anything
a partridge in a pear tree.
Yes, that too.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to see a wet dress rehearsal this time? Because that's something that a lot of people have been asking on each of our shows, if we're going to see some additional testing on top of those 5 things.
I think the wet dress rehearsal is going to be the first launch attempt, if I had to guess. That rather than doing it as its own thing of, all right, we'll do the wet dress, we'll drain it and go again, I think they're just going to load the thing up with fuel as if they're going to attempt a launch. At that point, if they notice something is wrong, then they can scrub, and at that point, hey, you got a free wet dress rehearsal. If things are going well and you don't need to, then hey, you get an earlier launch out of it. So it's a win either way.
And I'm guessing that it takes a while to get all that fuel to the launch site and stored, so you risk losing a lot of that fuel in the course of a wet dress rehearsal that you'd have to get back, and then certainly there's a lot of cost involved with that too, right?
Yeah, last time I believe we saw over 100 tanker trucks loading up between the first and second launch attempt of the first integrated flight test in a matter of 3 days there. So yeah, it's... to fill out those tank farms takes quite a while at the current moment. So it's one of those where you might as well try for the launch at that point. Now that, again, you've got at least one under your belt with Ship 4 and, with 24 and booster 7. So for this one, now that you kind of worked that out, why not just give it a shot, give it a try, and put it all to use?
Why not? Just launch the darn thing already. I have those little model rockets. You know, it looks good enough. I'll just launch it and see what happens. And if you're lucky, you get it back and you can try again. Although this one isn't coming back. But you know what? They can build them so quickly. It's almost easy enough to just start from scratch each time. We have been getting a lot of questions here, and I've got one from Kevin Furman about the hot staging ring, because it's certainly a new addition to this rocket, which also made it a little bit taller. Ian, have they done any testing of this? I know they're not going to do it on the pad, but they did test it before they welded it on or attached it to the current stack, right?
Yeah, so Kevin here is asking about a test fire through the hot stage ring. In theory, that's possible. However, I feel given you have the tower right next to it and you have your ground support equipment, especially the ship quick disconnect arm, that has a very high chance, if not certainty, of damaging some equipment on your pad and your tower. So it seems a bit risky there. But like you said, Lon, prior to Booster 9 having its hot stage ring installed, SpaceX did do structural testing over at the Masseys test site. Basically, you know, doing a big pulley system, kind of trying to compress the hot stage structure. They do that on a lot of their different vehicles, so it's nothing out of the ordinary there. It seemed to have passed that testing, so they installed it on Booster 9, and they're going to give it a shot during launch coming up. But I do think it's very unlikely to see any kind of major engine testing through that hot stage ring. I saw someone here in chat asking about a spin prime test, Mafia TV asking that. That seems a bit more likely, but still seems a little too risky given that ground support infrastructure you have there. Maybe they'll choose to do it if it seems not too risky, maybe spin prime an engine further away from the pad, but I think that's a bit still a bit too risky in that case.
And sorry, what is a spin test? Is that just running the fuel through the engine and not igniting it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you're basically getting right up to the point of where you would get ready to ignite the engines, but you're not actually getting to the ignition portion of it. It's, for those tests, you're not necessarily loading up your vehicle all the way to the top either, especially with the methane. Probably get a full load of the liquid oxygen, but the liquid methane, as explosive as that can be, you want to use just enough for that kind of test. So that may also be part of the reason why they would do a spin prime over a full wet dress. But again, at the same time, it could also all be done at once during an attempt.
All right. Well, before we move on to our next topic, which is all the other stuff going on at Starbase, if you can believe it, there's just a lot going on in addition to getting this rocket ready for flight. I will introduce a controversial question. Are we days, weeks, or months away? And I'll have Ian start. And if Kevin wants to ring the fight bell, we can have our debate. Days, weeks, or months? What are we looking at?
I think we are about a month away from flight. Maybe a few weeks away if things go really, really, really well. But I would say about mid-October is when I'm personally expecting it mid-October at this rate. Sawyer, my friend, go.
See, I disagree. So it's perfect. We're in fight mode. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a little bit closer to the end of this month. I don't think it's going to go all the way out to October. I think at least we'll see the first attempt in the final week of September. I don't know if that's actually going to lift off in that point, but I think we can see our first launch attempt at least sometime in that final week of September. So towards the very end of the month.
That's fair. I could see that.
Well, you know what is available now for this upcoming flight that you can get at this very moment, shipped to your home? The brand new Launch 2 hatch. And we have that at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. These are selling like hotcakes, and they are a great way that you can share with the world your love of spaceflight, including everything leading up to this launch and beyond, because of course Starship is going to be a big part of the Artemis program and will be the lander. And you can see the quality of this. It is embroidered. It's got like, I call it high resolution embroidery. That's what I can comprehend as a tech guy here. This is the kind of patch that, like, if you were an astronaut, I keep saying this, but it's true. If you were an astronaut, you ever seen, like, we've all met astronauts, they've got those really nice patches. Like, you wouldn't get one of those, like, generic ones slapped on your arm. Like, this is the good stuff here. Our very own Pauline designed these. They're really, really nice. And it's a great way, again, to share with the world your love of spaceflight. And in addition to the patch, we have this artwork on a lot of other swag, including pillows and coffee mugs and bottles, t-shirts, you name it. You can share, again, your love for space through this awesome patch. And I think it's really nice. I'm looking forward to getting that water bottle there. And it's a great way to support us and the efforts that we do, because in addition to the memberships and the super chats that you're also generous in providing, the merchandise does also help us grow this effort and keep those cameras running all over the world, keeping track of all this stuff, because there's quite a bit going on. And also on the site, you'll see some of our awesome metallic prints, including some really beautiful shots of those Raptor engines, as you can see there, on the bottom of one of the starships. And you can hang this up on your wall. It looks awesome in person, and you can get these things pretty quick from shop.nasaspaceflight.com. I got my box of swag the other day, and it comes very nicely packaged, so even the mugs will come intact. And if you have any trouble, of course, give us a call, and we will definitely make sure all is good there. Before we move on to our next topic here, I do have some folks to thank in the chat. Chariots of Fire with a $2 super chat is getting hyped. I am too, because I think we're getting there. We're making progress. We've got that report kind of out there now, so we know that's sort of done. And we'll see what else comes out of the Twitter account of Mr. Musk here as the week continues. Zeta Infinite became a Capcom member. Thank you very much for your support of the channel and your membership. Gary Maluski says, you guys do great work. A big SpaceX fan here. The only thing that I feel is very iffy is the catching of the booster and ship with the chopsticks. Your thoughts? We haven't talked about this, guys, because they're not going to catch this one, but maybe this is another Fight Club question. Do you think they're going to be able to pull it off, grabbing that rocket with chopsticks?
Oh, I guess we're back up.
Oh, Kevin.
I guess I'll take this one first as well. Will they do it? In the end, absolutely. I have zero doubt they're going to get to it eventually. The first try might be a little shaky. I think maybe they fail on the first attempt, but I think they are absolutely going to get it reliable within a few flights. When that happens, I'm going to say flight 5 for the first return. Sawyer?
I think Jake's got the right idea. Jake's my cat, by the way. See him kind of down there. Yeah, they're kind of chill on that part right now. They're not really focusing on it just yet. My opinion is they're going to need to have a full orbital flight first before they work on trying to catch the booster and deal with general reusability anyway. So I think we're still probably 6 or 7 flights away from trying to catch it at least.
And we saw that with Falcon 9 with those great videos that SpaceX put up of the multitude of explosions that it took to get that rocket to land upright without exploding. So I think there will be more of that in the future. But who knows? Maybe they've got this down to a more of a science than they had before. We do know that those chopsticks can support the weight because they have to lift Starship onto that booster, and they also use it to lift the booster. So clearly there's enough weight support there, but the question is, can you maneuver a rocket coming down from space in such a way in which it can be grabbed there? Last notice of support here for the time being comes from Anonymous with a store message. You can leave messages for us when you check out in the merch store there. He feels that the NASA meatball is still the better way to go, so there you go. Yeah, I like the worm and the meatball depending on which side of the rocket you're talking about there. So in the back room, I am told that we have some more to talk about here related to the manifold replacement. I don't know if, Ian, you can take us up on that.
Manifold replacement. Oh, so manifold replacement. I apologize, I'm blanking on this. Sorry, do you want to take this one for a second? I
guess it's for the water tanks or something?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we've seen a lot of hardware being replaced here for the water tanks, and this is for the deluge system. Now, there's been a lot of work being put into this over the past few months. I mean, this system was not even in place prior to the first flight. This was all put in very recently. We've been seeing them do a bit of hardware replacement after the after the last test. I see Jake there in the background is making me laugh. But yeah, we did see them do a few tests here. They decided to do some hardware replacement in there. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to avoid the merge fight too, and it just happens to show Jake there.
Yeah, we've been seeing them do some hardware replacement on the sound suppression, or I guess the deluge system lines here. So it seems that they may have run into some issues during previous tests, maybe didn't perform up to standard, maybe they were like, hey, we actually found a better way to go about this. We found this new part or this new engineering method. And so they've been doing some replacements here and there. I don't know if this necessarily points to them doing any further testing of the deluge system prior to launch, or if they're just going to go straight into it on the first launch attempt. But yeah, we've been seeing them do some work here and there on their replacing some parts and, kind of crossing their T's, dotting their I's here.
And Tori, it looks like we saw some of that work being done from our cameras that are on site there, because that was one of the other tea leaves that we were looking for, because they had taken things out, but now it looks like they've put those things back in, or at least have done some additional work on it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've seen them actually working on the one that runs directly under the tank. I believe so far we know that one for sure has been replaced, and now they're continuing to work on a few more down the line. Obviously, this is super important in terms of protecting the launch pad and the vehicle itself, hence the new deluge system with that steel plate and all that, which you need seems like a heck of a lot more water for. So at least you've got that. They've also been doing work, I believe, on the subcoolers too. And I know we have some fantastic video of that. Notice how there's a few more than we originally saw. You can see the ones that still have the dents in it from that first flight. Right. But yeah, they've kind of doubled the number of subcoolers as well. So you're increasing your flow rate. There we go. In terms of water, and now also increasing the amount of fuel that you got there. So as Alex is pointing out in the back, that's 2. They had 2, now there are 4 on the liquid methane side, and there are now 8 on the liquid oxygen side, so double.
So by doubling the pumps and the tanks, am I safe to assume that this would increase the rate that they can fuel this thing up?
I don't know so much if it's about the fuel rate. I think a lot of it, again, for the water, it's to supply the deluge system. Right. For these extra subcoolers, I think it might be so that you've got faster turnaround. So rather than having to wait for 100 trucks in between attempts, you just load them up with 200 trucks all at once, and then you can try 2 flight attempts in there.
Got it. And we've talked about this before, but I think it's worth mentioning because we're seeing those dented tanks. Sorry, those tanks are dented on the outside, but the inside, where the pressure tank is undamaged.
Right. There are multiple layers to those tanks, so it's very important to note that there's the main part that's actually pressurized on the inside, and then there's kind of that protective shell on the outside. So even though there's that damaged exterior, that really doesn't impact the interior. So as long as that portion is okay, then you could just keep on using it. And kind of like people that drive around with the rear bumper hanging off or disappearing from their car.
Right.
Is it helpful to avoid damage? Yeah, but it's not necessary to keep driving.
And that's it. So hopefully those tanks will keep flowing, and we're seeing again that activity happening, kind of closing up all those checklist items so that they can have a healthy launch pad. And as we all saw that launch pad just a couple of months ago, it was pretty destroyed, let's just put it that way. And it's certainly come back to the point where, minus the dents in the tank, it looks like nothing happened. So we will keep an eye on what's going on there and keep you all informed. And this is not the only mission that's taking place here right now, because we also have the rollout of Ship 26 and Booster 10 happening alongside all of this other activity. So Ian, what happened with those 2 items?
Yes, so like I mentioned a few minutes ago, Ship 26 has been rolled out to the launch site. It's been put onto suborbital stand B, and that really indicates that they're going forward with some kind of engine testing on this vehicle. The reason I say that is because if they were doing cryogenic proofing, which it looks like they're going to do on Booster 10, but more on that in a moment, Ship 26 is on a test stand. That is the only place where they can do engine testing. We do know that Ship 26 has all 6 Raptors installed on it, so it seems to be ready to go for some kind of engine testing. But we also mentioned Booster 10. So Booster 10 was rolled out to SpaceX's kind of cryogenic and structural testing facility called Masseys. Now that's actually in the opposite direction down the road from the launch site. Now, what they're going to do there is cryogenic proofing. They put liquid nitrogen in the tanks, pressurize them to make sure that they can withstand pressure. There are no Raptors on this booster. It's actually missing quite a few things. It's missing Raptors, it's missing some of the chines, the shielding, a lot of flight hardware is missing from this vehicle, but that's okay. They're only testing the tanks here. So yeah, you can see here on screen, we captured Booster 10 rolling out the other day. This is likely to be for the third flight. And it seems that Ship 26 also will be flying on top of Booster 10 here. So you can see Booster 10 rolling out. It's got grid fins on top, so that's a good indicator right there. And yeah, this seems like it's going to be on the third flight of Starship. So very interesting that SpaceX is kind of pushing ahead with testing here. Not really unexpected if we're going to be real about it. The steamroller just keeps on rolling here. But yeah, seems like Flight 3 preparations are already deep underway, and we're going to have to keep our eyes on these over the next few days and weeks. See what they do with Ship 26. Do they go on with engine testing, or are they just doing cryoproofing out there? And then Booster 10 as well, we have some cameras on Masseys, so be sure to keep an eye on Starbase Live, and you'll be able to stay up to date with everything going on down at Starbase.
There's also kind of a way to know when all of these rolls are happening and everything, too. It's worth pointing out. A lot of times they will do road closures for them. How do you find those road closures? Well, go to wenhop.com. Plain and simple as that. That'll send you to the page on NASASpaceflight that tells you all of the upcoming road closures. You can see right now there's a big whole whopping none. But other than that, yeah, it's got all of the closures as well as updates under the merch by here, as well as updates on all the different vehicles, the test tanks, where they're at, some info on them. So you got the whole log of vehicles and when there are, or in this case, aren't road closures.
And so another way to read the tea leaves is to check out WenHop there to find out. There's a website for that. And one of the things that a lot of people were noticing, Sawyer, is that Ship 26 does not have any fins on it.
Yeah, like you were saying, there's a lot of things missing from it. It has the spot where heat shield tiles can be added, but there are none. There are no flaps to it. So it's interesting to see what they end up doing with it. Obviously, it's on suborbital pad B there, which we're expecting for engine testing. So is it just an engine test stand? Is it they know that on the next flight they want to focus on just the booster, so they're not as worried about having everything on the ship itself? There's still a lot of questions about what exactly it's going to be used for and where it goes next after this as well. So something that'll definitely be keeping an eye on, because in my personal opinion, kind of ugly that way.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to have that aerodynamic feature to it, which is important. And Ian, those fins are designed for its return to Earth. It's not usually guiding the rocket on the way up.
Oh yeah, those flaps are absolutely not moving during launch. They should not be moving during launch, and if they are moving during launch, things are going to go very, very badly. Those flaps are completely stationary. They are out at a 90-degree angle from the ship during launch, and those are only used on descent. Those are completely locked on ascent. Sawyer, like the space shuttle did, it had its, they weren't actively guiding the stack during launch, much like these flaps here aren't. So yeah, on launch day, they are going to be sticking straight out to have as little drag as possible on the vehicle, as little of an effect as possible, and yeah, they will not be used until atmospheric reentry if Ship 25 does reach that point.
Also worth noting how long it's been since you can see the ship cryo test on the left. That's Ship 26 over there. Just to give you an idea how long it's been, it still has the old logo. So it's been quite a while here since we've seen
back in
testing on it. Yeah, so it's interesting to see it back out for more testing now, and with as old as it, old relatively as it is, it'll be interesting to see if they end up actually flying it.
And
it's SpaceX time, old is relative, isn't it?
Yeah,
very.
It is, and Ship 25 is actually very old in terms of vehicle production rates. It's actually older than Booster 9, I believe. Booster 9 is technologically newer. It's got newer tech on it than Ship 25. But one thing that's interesting about Ship 26, where I'm thinking here, maybe it's a backup, because SpaceX does have Ship 28 seemingly ready to go, which is much more advanced than Ship 26. It has a payload bay, which seems like it hasn't been welded shut yet. It's got the flaps and the heat shield tiles, so they could do some additional testing using that. But it makes me wonder, because yeah, Ship 29 is basically done as well. Ship 28 seems to be ready for more advanced testing. Why Ship 26 now? That's kind of a big mystery right now.
I guess, sorry, if you were intending to just see if you could get something into a suborbital flight, you really don't need those flaps or fins on the side of the rocket, right? You could send it up, execute your whatever you're trying to do, activate the flight abort system on the way down, and call yourself a successful first suborbital flight, right?
Or better yet,
do we need all this stuff that's on Ship 25, or could we do it with Ship 26?
I mean, better yet, kind of what they're doing with this one as well, with Ship 25. Yeah, it's got the heat shield tiles and everything on it, but in terms of the actual re-entry, they're not doing anything to attempt to slow it down, to stop it. They expect it to be destroyed upon hitting the surface of the ocean near Hawaii. With one with no heat shield tiles, no flaps, nothing aerodynamic to it other than just its current shape, you've got a better chance, I guess, of that potentially getting super hot and burning up in the atmosphere, and the only thing that's left is a couple of pieces. So if it did fly, it would be, again,
guaranteed
just totally
destruction.
destroyed. Right,
yeah.
But at this point, it seems like just based off of the fact that it doesn't have any of those, that it's more for ground testing.
Interesting. Well, we'll have to keep an eye on this too. And again, all we can do is speculate because SpaceX will do a lot of activities. We happen to see it because our cameras are there at the side of the road, keeping an eye on things. In fact, Ian, you could just drive down this road and see what we see, right, if you were down there?
Yeah, I mean, you can see that truck there in the bottom left corner. You can drive down this road any day that you want, provided it's not closed for testing. This is Highway 4 in Boca Chica. You could take it from Brownsville all the way down to Boca Chica Beach. There is a public beach. If you can actually see in the bottom right, there's some dunes there kind of right on the horizon. Beyond there's a public beach. You can go surfing there, you can go sunbathing there, go swimming anytime that you want. Of course, other than testing days. You could drive right past this launch site. It is a very, very open launch site in terms of rocketry. Cape Canaveral, Vandenberg, especially Vandenberg, Wallops, you cannot drive up right next to the launch pad, almost literally a stone's throw away from the rocket. This is a very kind of a special exception here. I mean, there you go. You could see there's some cars, trucks parked right on the side of the highway there. You're right next to the launch site. This is a very unique thing to have in the spaceflight world.
Unsurfing Starship, what more could you want?
Yeah, that's right. It'd be a fun day trip, and you don't have to take the tour bus. You can stay as long as you want. So it's a great opportunity. Well, we got a couple more people to thank before we close out here, unless there's other things going on. But I want to thank Jason, who picked up one of the new patches. So he's got both of them now, because we did have one from the first mission as well. I'm not sure if we have any left up there, but there might be some from the first mission you can find at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. Anonymous with a store message, do you think they will have the oil rig retrofit towers ready before or after Florida? I'm not sure what he's talking about there, Sawyer, do you?
If we're talking about the oil rigs that SpaceX had originally purchased, those are basically decommissioned. They're not planning on using those at any point.
Right, so. Those are the things they were going to have out in the ocean, right, that you could, got it. So those are out of the picture. Carl Owen, thank you for the upgrade to Capcom, and M2M was at a lower membership level just a few minutes ago and is now Capcom as well. Thank you both for your support and your membership upgrades. Here's just a kind of a hypothetical question. How will Starship, this is from Roland Mine with a $4.99 super chat, how will Starship accommodate nuclear fission propulsion in space for faster travel in the future rather than just utilizing RP-1? And I like this question because I think one of the unique features of Starship versus some of the other deep space rockets that we have seen in history is that this is a multi-purpose design that theoretically could accommodate something like that, Ian, right?
Yes, so we actually made a video on this, all the variants of Starship, and to kind of spoil what I said in that video, there's a lot of variants. There are a lot of types of Starships here. To correct the comment here from Roland, it's using methane, not RP-1.
Oh, that's
and
right. Yep.
Nuclear fission, I mean, SpaceX has expressed interest in doing nuclear or nuclear thermal propulsion in the past. They said they were trying to get some kind of nuclear fission material to make some test engines with. That was back in around 2017, 2018. We've not heard anything since. As far as we know, SpaceX is sticking with Raptor for the long term, or at least derivations of Raptor. Nuclear thermal propulsion, of course, would be excellent for deep space missions, especially getting to like Jupiter or Saturn. Nuclear thermal is phenomenal for those kind of missions, but it's also unproven. It's never flown before. NASA is developing a new nuclear thermal propulsion engine, and they're going to be flying it later this decade, but it's never been flown, especially on a crewed mission. It's very unproven, and I think it's going to be a long time before we see it actually fly in operation. Starship itself, I don't really see it getting nuclear fission anytime soon.
And there you go. I think you're probably right about that, although it would be really cool to say we've got a nuclear rocket. That sucker's nuclear.
Yes.
Alexander Ash with a question. This is a good one, I think, because I don't know what to call these things. We need a better word than flaps. I call them fins. They're flaps. What else could we call them? Aerodynamic surfaces? We should come up with like a term.
Oh,
fight.
no. We're going into fight mode again.
Really, Kevin?
So
that was all Kevin that caused that.
It's strange because a lot of aerospace terminology, like with the shuttle, came over from airplanes.
Right.
So you had like your wings, you had your elevons, your rudder, and all that. But like, Starship isn't a plane. You kind of can't bring that much terminology over here without it being kind of shoehorned into place. I think flaps is personally the best option here. Sawyer, take it. What do you think?
Non-flappy bits. How about that? We want to go a little less technical, but yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, they're basically, I guess they're kind of air surfaces because they don't really do that
Control
much
surfaces?
in space. It's more for once they're coming back to land. I see people calling them flapperons. I see them flippers. I kind of like they are kind of like pinball flippers that will eventually retract and hide. So yeah, I'm going to go with flippers on this one then, and I think Jake agrees.
I keep going back to fins because Jake is the star of the show here, and it's funny. Jake looks enormous. He looks like a huge prehistoric monster cat there, given the angle on the camera.
He's like 9 pounds.
But for me, he's 9 pounds. He looks like 9,000 pounds here. But when I was a kid, I played around with those Estes rockets, and they called them fins. That's why I have that kind of locked in my head there. So a few more thank yous before we wrap up here, and I'll let you all have your final thoughts. Chris W. gifted a Red Team membership. Thank you very much for that. Robert Calhoun is a Pad Rat member. Thank you very much for your support there. And we also have a nice comment from a store message from Zachary, who picked up some merch at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. And the last word from the supporters here is Robbie with a store message, Go Starship, from Liverpool, UK. And we're going to keep an eye on Starship. This show is going to be coming up throughout the week here because we anticipate a lot of developments very, very quickly. And I think that launch cadence will start to accelerate once all the pieces get put into place. Any last words, Ian, before we close out?
Nothing here. I'm just very excited to see the pace is really picking up here. It really seems like we're actually getting close to Flight 2. Of course, we're going to need to keep our eye on the regulatory side, but also on the hardware readiness and the pad readiness side. So, yeah, everyone, make sure you stay up to date on everything happening here with NSF. We're going to give you information as soon as it comes out, and I cannot wait to keep sharing what's happening down here in Starbase.
And Sawyer, I'm going to turn it over to you and Jake. I'm sure Jake has something to say, too, about this. He seems to be eager to jump on camera with you.
Yeah, he says, first off, he's not fat. Thank you very much. No, but in all honesty, it's exciting. And again, there's a lot of things to look out for in terms of when we're getting close to flight. There's a video coming very soon on it. And it's, I think that'll answer a lot of the questions that we have. And it'll just make it that much more fun to watch Starbase live 24/7, nsf.live/Starbase.
And this show has been a great opportunity for me to get to know everybody and also to get to know our audience because I'm the new guy around here, so I appreciate everybody tuning in. Definitely hit that bell because we're going to come on live either with one of these shows or with some special break-in coverage when things are happening down at Starbase. And if you want to be the first to see some of these milestones take place, well, you better tune in because we're going to try to cover them as quickly as we can here. So stay tuned. We'll be back with another countdown to launch show very shortly here on NSF, along with a bunch of other content that both Ian and Sawyer have been teasing as we've been going here. We've been really stepping up our game both on the recorded side but also on the live side because we anticipate a growing interest out there from all of you about the very rapid development of space exploration. We're finally getting the future that we were promised, at least the one that I was as a kid from the 80s. So stay tuned, a lot more to come here. Thanks to Ian and Sawyer for their time and expertise today. And until the next one, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching.
And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, planet.
Water towers fly! Yes! Tango down to nominal.
Flight downside speed off. Bring in SPD off. It's orange! 145! Oh my god! Oh my god! Decollage!
What is it?
Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
If the methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?